The ICC has come out with a pretty bombshell announcement. They're applying for warrants for Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, other Hamas leadership, as well as Israeli leadership, including Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli military leaders like Mr. Gallant. So we have a lot to go through. Obviously, that's a pretty big bombshell for the International Criminal Court to drop right in the middle of this war, to turn to both sides and say, you belong in prison. You belong in prison. So we got a lot to go through. We're going to read the basics, then we're going to listen to the International Criminal Court's appeal, and then we're going to come away with whatever conclusion we can, understanding that this is a developing situation. We're going to watch as evidence is presented, and that we just cannot conclude too much right now, because we're just seeing this information be taken from the International Criminal Court and hoisted over to the judges at the ICC, and it's going to be up to them to decide, which is the first thing I need to say before we read any of this, is that this is not an official arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. So that means currently the leader of Hamas and the leader of Israel do not have warrants for their arrest out right now, at least not with the International Criminal Court. What the International Criminal Court is doing is they're trying to apply with a judge, so a judge can review the case on a case-by-case basis and therefore either approve or deny the warrant for their arrest, and from there the person will be wanted. That's what they had to do with the case of Vladimir Putin, and that is why Vladimir Putin is currently wanted for the kidnapping of 15,000 Ukrainian children and illegally deporting them to Russia to be put in re-education camps or to be given to foster families without the consent of their surviving relatives. And so let's start by reading the different cases being brought against the Hamas leaders, and then read the different cases being brought against the Israeli leaders before we watch the announcement video. So you guys have a general overview before we listen to what the ICC has to say. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, Mohammed Daeed Ibrahim al-Marsi, and Ismail Haniyeh, sorry, I pronounced the last name wrong. On the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that all of the same people we just mentioned, more commonly known as the DEIF, the commander-in-chief of the military wing of Hamas, I already read all the people that I just said, bear criminal responsibility for the following war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of Israel and the State of Palestine in the Gaza Strip from at least October 7th, 2023. That was the date when Hamas sent troops over the border into Israel, attacked a bunch of kibbutzim as well as Israeli soldiers, and not only killed Israeli military personnel, but ended up killing and kidnapping Israeli civilians as well. Extermination as a crime against humanity, contrary to Article 7.1b of the Rome Statute. Murder as a crime against humanity, contrary to Article 7.1a, and as a war crime, contrary to Article 8.2ci. Taking hostages as a war crime, contrary to Article 8.2c III, which is just, 3. Rape and other acts of sexual violence as a crime against humanity, contrary to Article 7.1g, and also as a war crime pursuant to Article 8.2e VI in the context of captivity. Torture as a crime against humanity, contrary to Article 7.1f, and also as a war crime, contrary to Article 8.2ci in the contents of captivity. Other inhumane acts as a war crime against humanity, contrary to Article 7.1k in the context of captivity. Cruel treatment as a war crime, contrary to Article 8.2ci in the contents of captivity. And outrages upon personal dignity as a war crime, contrary to Article 8.2cii in the context of captivity. So, extermination as a crime against humanity, murder as a crime against humanity, taking hostages as a war crime, rape and other acts of violence, sexual violence as a crime against humanity, torture as a crime against humanity, other inhumane acts as a crime against humanity, cruel treatment as a war crime contrary to Article 8, and outrages upon personal dignity as a war crime. So that is quite the rap sheet. Now let's read the Israeli side of the picture here from the ICC. Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant On the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense of Israel, bear criminal responsibility for the following war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of the State of Palestine and the Gaza Strip from at least October 8th, 2023. Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare as a war crime contrary to Article 2B XXV of the statute, willful causing of great suffering or serious injury to body or health, contrary to Article 82A or cruel treatment as a war crime contrary to Article 82CI, willful killing contrary to Article 82AI, or murder as a war crime contrary to Article 82CI, intentional directing of attacks against a civilian population as a war crime contrary to Article 82CI, intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as a war crime contrary to Articles 82BI or 82BEI, extermination and or murder contrary to Articles 71B and 71A, including in the context of deaths caused by starvation as a crime against humanity, persecution as a crime against humanity contrary to Article 71H, and other inhumane acts as crimes against humanity contrary to Article 71K. So let's read through them abbreviated quickly again. Starvation of civilians is a method of warfare as a crime contrary to Article 8. Willful causing of great suffering or serious injury to body or health. Willful killing contrary to Article 8. Intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population. Extermination and or murder contrary to Article 7. Including in the context of death caused by starvation, persecution as a crime against humanity, and other inhumane acts as a crime against humanity. So, that is quite a lot. And something that I'll take away from this immediately is that this is something that's going to anger both sides of the divide depending on who you are. On one hand, if you're somebody who's very critical of Israel, believes that the main contributing factors to this is the Israeli occupation, that leads to these waves of violence. If you're somebody who's very critical of the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, Gallant, and of Ben Gvir, then you're going to be pretty excited about this. But if you're very in defense of Israel, there's a few things that obviously you're not going to be happy about. Number one, you're not going to be happy about the starvations of civilians as a method of warfare. Now, if you're critical of Israel, you could say that at the start of this war, having the food cut off to Gaza in the way that the Israeli military did it was starving the population, a form of collective punishment, punishing the population as an entity of Hamas, since they voted for Hamas, and therefore was going to starve the whole population, treat them as if they basically were Hamas. And early on, especially from statements from the defense minister and others, it certainly seemed that at the very least, they were willfully admitting to that basically being the policy. While as of recent, the Israeli government has been a lot more open and willing to acknowledge, like, okay, yeah, I guess some aid should get in. There's questions about restrictions that they place, stopping aid. There's questions about border protests from settlement extremists or the Israeli fringe right going to aid trucks, destroying the aid trucks. There's even questions about civilians going to get aid, being fired upon. The fact is, though, now that the Israeli government at least acknowledges that getting aid into Gaza is important. So any of those early statements from Israeli government officials, in my mind, only become more damning from the fact that it is now acknowledged that this is a humanitarian necessity if we want the over 2 million people that are living in the Gaza Strip to survive to the end of this war. But on the other end of the equation, somebody from Israel might say, the fact that we have to give the people who just attacked us water and us cutting that off is considered collective punishment is ridiculous. Should we really have to continuously supply the Gaza Strip with water? I mean, you could talk about the conditions that created that water shortage, but at the end of the day, they are the ones who attacked Israel. Why should Israel have to supply them? But on the other hand, the ICC is going to say, if that is their number one source of water is across this border, and that is cut off, there has to be some forethought given by Israeli authorities into what the effect will be of cutting off that water. Everyone needs water, not just Hamas, and it's not like cutting off the water is going to magically make Hamas all like, oh God, we don't have water, we're all gonna die of dehydration. The civilians will die of dehydration, maybe. Maybe those in hospitals will. Maybe the poor will. But the Hamas fighters, they've got water bottles stuffed away in cave. We all know that. And I don't want to go through everything here, but just to give you an idea of how this is something that would anger the Israeli side, will, something that will obviously make the more pro-Palestinian side more happy on just the starvation and the water angle. I don't want to go through every single one of these because this is a lot, and we're going to listen to the ICC report in a second. On the other end of this, if you're super pro-Palestine, and when I say super pro-Palestine, I mean to the point of just rejecting any information that could possibly make, say, Hamas look bad, which I don't want to present that as the pro-Palestine position, but I'm just saying the fringes here, this is something that's not going to make you happy. So number one, rape and other sexual acts of sexual violence is something that's been highly disputed by pro-Hamas and anti-Israel commentators who continue to say that sexual violence did not occur, rape did not occur, or if they did occur, it was very minor or wasn't that widespread. And so this being brought before the ICC and being thrown before a judge could point towards the fact that evidence could be presented showing that these types of crimes absolutely did occur, and that evidence of showing that people who are going around and shooting dogs and shooting civilians might just so well be willing to rape somebody. If you're willing to murder civilians, you might be willing to rape civilians. And so that's something that's probably going to leave, let's just say, Hamas stands kind of angry. The torture part is probably going to make the people who are deluded in their support of Hamas angry as well, because if torture is being used in parts of Gaza against people who are detained, that is something that Hamas very much does not want to be projected, because I see a lot of people on social media talking about how great a lot of the detainees were treated by Hamas, and it's all fantastic, and the testimony shows it, even though other people will give different testimony about how exactly they were treated, or how Hamas has used torture as a weapon in the past. Point is, that stuff probably is going to make the Israel side a lot more happy, and that's going to make the Palestinian side a lot less happy. And so it seems to me that a lot of the major claims, if not all, most of the major claims put forward by Palestinians and Israel are being brought before the International Criminal Court. And now, irrespective on your stance on any individual one of these bullet points, which we could go through, but I honestly don't have the time, legal expertise, or all the information to do so. The fact that more information is being brought forward to be put under review does mean that these issues can get better legal transparency for everyday people who have so much information getting thrown at the wall so constantly, so much footage that's been manipulated, so much disinformation, so many pictures of old conflicts being reposted saying they're new conflicts, that this can help give some clarity to the people who are trying to inform themselves, as well as help ground us better when it comes to international law and what laws are being violated, so we can stop working in legal theory and we can start working in legal fact. I wanted to show the International Criminal Court announcement of this case because this is pretty major. This is an announcement of possibly bringing an arrest warrant forward on, if this goes through and the judges agree, on both the leader of Hamas and Israel, which I gotta say, this is the ICC version of, I guess, just bringing them both, like grabbing them both by the ear and saying, stop. Anyway, let's listen.
Today, I'm filing applications for warrants of arrest before Pretrial Chamber 1 of the International Criminal Court in the situation in the State of Palestine. These applications are the outcome of independent investigations conducted by my office under the direction of the two principal trial lawyers standing behind me today, Brenda J. Hollis, who, in addition to leading our work in the situation in Ukraine for the past couple of years, has since January also taken over leadership of the Palestine investigation. And Andrew Cayley, King's Counsel, who more recently joined the office and will be leading our work on the situation in the State of Palestine going forward. On the basis of evidence collected and examined and analysed by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that 3 senior leaders of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Daif, and Ismail Haniyeh, bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of Israel and the State of Palestine from at least the 7th of October 2023. Extermination as a crime against humanity. Murder as a crime against humanity and as a war crime. The taking of hostages as a war crime. Rape and other acts of sexual violence during captivity as crimes against humanity and as war crimes. Torture during captivity as a crime against humanity.
Okay, I need to say something right here. Since it's already going through a lot of stuff we already covered, I'm fine with them going through the refresher again quickly. I just want to throw out there, though, that I hear a lot of discussion about jurisdiction and ICC jurisdiction, and how Israel does not claim ICC jurisdiction over itself. It rejects the International Criminal Court. It rejects their authority. It doesn't respect it.
Morally corrupt,
now,
bankrupt man.
Aw, BopandWab, thank you so much for gifting a tier 1 sub to High Functioning Stoner. I appreciate that, buddy. You've gifted how many? Oh my gosh, like 32 subs? My goodness. You've gifted a lot of subs in the channel. Where was I? Oh, yes. I had it and then I lost it again. Those subs really do throw you off. Where was I? It was... Oh, yes. So, Israel does not believe the authority of the ICC can dictate what it can and cannot do, and does not respect the authority of the International Criminal Court. But I will also say that Russia doesn't respect the International Criminal Court or its authority over it, but we still believe, the United States, that we should assist the ICC. Even we don't believe, at least we never ratified the Rome Statute, we don't believe the ICC has legal authority over the United States as well. But when it came time to assist the International Criminal Court in investigating Russian war crimes and investigating either executions, rape, torture, unlawful detainment, or any of these other crimes that were committed by the Russian army during their butchering in Ukraine, we were more than happy to oblige. We were more than happy to assist them, because in principle, we agreed that an overarching legal institution that could hold people accountable for crimes against humanity and war crimes and other things that are breaking with the most basic principles of human decency, we need that on the international stage. And so the ICC performed that function when it came to the Russians. And what did that end with? It ended with the Russian leader having a wanted notice out for him, that there's a warrant for his arrest out there right now. And then when that thing turns around, do you think we respect or would respect any wanted warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu if he visited the United States? It's just, people can say that these norms and these standards and these hypocrisies don't matter. I remember me and Destiny, we debated once that he didn't really seem to put much weight in it. But the degradation of these norms and making it easier and easier and easier for other countries to disregard their authority, when the most powerful countries on the world stage can so easily disregard their authority and do it with very little repercussion, either financial, geopolitical, or even when it comes to the reputation of said country, then it degrades the norms. When the most powerful amongst us don't treat the law as the law, it becomes less so. BopandWab, thank you so much for the gifted tier 1 sub to TGO33333. I appreciate that.
And as a war crime. Other inhumane acts during captivity as a crime against humanity. Cruel treatment during captivity as a war crime. and outrages upon personal dignity during captivity as a war crime. These crimes were committed in the context of the ongoing armed conflict detailed in the applications, and as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of Israel by Hamas and other armed groups. My office submits that there are reasonable grounds to believe that these three Hamas leaders are criminally responsible for the killing of Israeli civilians in attacks perpetrated by Hamas and other armed groups on the 7th of October 2023, the taking of hostages, and the other crimes alleged in our application.
Why are they just standing there next to him? Is it just to like show their authority? I know like the guy on the right, he deals a lot with Gaza, but I guess it's just to like show that the office is united. I guess that's the image that they want to project.
My office has diligently collected evidence and interviewed survivors and eyewitnesses at the scene of at least 6 major attack locations. The applications rely upon evidence such as CCTV footage, authenticated audio, photographs and video material, expert evidence, and statements by Hamas and the members of other armed groups, including by the alleged perpetrators themselves. Sinwar, Deif, and Haniya not only planned and instigated the crimes committed on the 7th of October 2023 in our submission, they also acknowledged their responsibility through their own words and by their actions. They are charged both as co-perpetrators and as superiors. My office also submits today that there are reasonable grounds to believe that hostages taken from Israel, taken from their homes, taken from their communities, have been kept in inhumane conditions, and that some have been subjected to horrendous sexual violence, including rape, while being held in captivity. We have reached that conclusion based upon medical records, contemporaneous video and documentary evidence, and interviews with survivors.
I mean, that seems to be pretty conclusive. Medical records, video and audio, and interviews with survivors. I mean, that seems pretty decisive.
We are continuing our investigations into crimes committed on the 7th of October.
Do you think this will lead to the people who continue to deny that sexual crimes occurred? Do you think this will shut them up for a bit so they can at least see the evidence? Or do you think they're just going to keep on going and just be like, oh, I'm sure whatever the International Criminal Court eventually presents won't be that concrete?
Of October, including investigating further reports of sexual violence. And I repeat and underline my call for the immediate release of all hostages taken from Israel and for their immediate safe return to their families. This is a fundamental imperative, demanded by good conscience, demanded by morality, and demanded by international humanitarian law. Hostages must be released immediately. I can also confirm today that I have reasonable grounds to believe, on the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of the State of Palestine from at least the 8th of October 2023. The crimes include starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering, serious injury to body or health or cruel treatment, willful killing or murder, and intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population, as well as crimes against humanity of extermination and or murder, persecution, and allegations of crimes of committing other inhumane acts.
I feel like the ICC is trying to stand in the center of this conflict. I mean, if it's not hard for me to see Hamas committing war crimes, considering the footage that I've seen. I've seen footage of them committing war crimes, but also it is not hard to imagine the IDF, after what Hamas did on October 7th, committing war crimes as well. And we have footage to suggest whether it was the killing of those World Central Kitchen people or the blowing up of the I think the only Orthodox church that has been blown up in Ukraine that killed those civilians, whether it was the firing of that aid truck mission, the firing at that aid truck that was carrying in supplies as civilians tried to gather those supplies. I think that there is enough evidence to create quite the impression of the IDF. And even if you ignore all of that or try to explain it all away, TikTok video after social media video of different IDF soldiers taking much joy in blowing up every home that they can come across or destroying the property of those who live in Gaza is certainly not doing much work. And so if you are the ICC, or I mean, it's certainly not helping their image. If you're the International Criminal Court and you're watching all of this go down and your job is to, well, I guess, point out and label and try to bring to justice war criminals and war crimes, your job isn't to say this is the side that's done the most war crimes or this is the side that's done the least war crimes, and so this is the good side, this is the bad side. Your job is just to point out the war crimes. And so when you've got, fringe settler nationalists on the Israeli side and Hamas on the other, yeah, you're going to have a lot of material to work with, hypothetically, don't you? Especially if you have mobilized reservists on low discipline and a lot of hate because of what have happened on October 7th. I mean, so I don't think this is them trying to list both sides it for both sides and purposes. I haven't been presented enough evidence of that. I think it's them trying to legitimately shoot it straight down the middle. If you were to ask me my impression I'm getting from this.
It's alleged that these crimes were committed in the context of the ongoing armed conflict and as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of Gaza pursuant to a state policy. Unfortunately, these crimes continue to this day. My office submits that these individuals, through a common plan, have systematically deprived the civilian population of Gaza of objects indispensable to human survival. We have reached that conclusion based upon interviews with survivors, many eyewitnesses, experts, from satellite imagery, statements from Israeli officials, including the 2 individuals subject to the present application, as well as based upon several hundred authenticated videos, photographs, and audio recordings, many of which were taken and shared by victims and eyewitnesses themselves. This systematic deprivation resulted from a decision to impose a total siege on Gaza by completely closing the 3 border crossing points, Rafah, Karim Shalom, and Erez, for extended periods of time and by arbitrarily restricting the transportation of essential supplies, including food and medicine, through the border crossings after they were reopened. The siege, the total siege, also involved cutting off cross-border water pipelines from Israel to Gaza, which is the principal source of clean water for the population in Gaza. It was cut off for prolonged periods beginning on the 9th of October 2023, and it was accompanied by the cutting off or hindering of electricity supplies to Gaza from the 8th of October 2023 until today. That conduct took place alongside attacks that killed civilians, including people queuing for food, the obstruction of aid delivery by humanitarian organizations, and attacks on aid workers that forced many of those same humanitarian organizations to either cease operations or limit their life-saving efforts in Gaza.
That's true. I mean, you can't deny it. The World Central Kitchen, people being killed in a zone that was declared to be peaceful. Whether it would, I mean, it's, you can't deny it.
The tragic effect of the use of starvation as a method of warfare against Gaza's civilian population.
It seems like both sides are pissed at the ICC. Yes.
Acute, it's visible, and it's widely known, and it's confirmed by multiple witnesses and victims, including local and foreign medical doctors. That starvation has caused and continues to cause deaths, malnutrition, dehydration, and profound suffering among the population. Famine is already present in some areas of Gaza, and it is imminent in others. My office charges Netanyahu and Gallant as co-perpetrators and as superiors in the commission of these alleged crimes. Israel, like all states, has the right to defend its population. It has every right to ensure the return of hostages that have been criminally and callously taken. Those rights, however, do not absolve Israel of its obligations to comply with international humanitarian law.
True.
Intentionally causing death, starvation, injury, and suffering to the civilian population.
Like, when people talk about the law of proportionality, and then the response is, well, they voted for Hamas anyway, they're just as culpable. That doesn't explain it. That doesn't, like, make it legal. Like, number one, the majority of people in Gaza are under the age of 14, so they didn't vote for them, since they didn't have elections since the early 2000s. But number two, that also does not take away your responsibility to be proportional in your attacks. And that doesn't mean one death to one death, one Israeli to every Hamas fighter. That means that when you take strikes, to the military necessity of the strike, to that military necessity, you have to balance out civilian costs. For example, if you were to say have one Hamas fighter in a building with 20 civilians, there's no good justification to blow up that building. But let's say it's 30 Hamas fighters and one civilian, you could probably make a military justification for blowing up said building. That is still, now, of course, it's not arbitrary, but this is a standard that each country kind of creates for itself. And so in this instance, could you throw out there that Israel could make the standard arbitrary to itself? To a degree, but it's a general principle that all countries should abide by. And it is the legal standard internationally.
Including so very many women and children, are criminal means to achieve military and political goals. That's what we allege. As I have repeatedly underlined, since last year in Egypt, in Israel, and in Palestine, and again this year, those who do not comply with the law should not complain later when my office takes action based upon solid evidence. That day has come. Today we underline in the clearest possible fashion that international law and the laws of armed conflict apply to everyone. No foot soldier, no commander, no civilian leader, no one can act with impunity. Nothing on earth can justify willfully depriving human beings, including women and children, babies, the old and the young, of the basic necessities required for life. Nothing on earth can justify hostage taking or the targeting and killing of civilians. The independent judges of this International Criminal Court are the sole arbiters as to whether the necessary standard for the issuance of warrants of arrest have been met.
Israel doesn't agree with that. They're not going to cooperate. Just throwing it out there that they don't believe. Again, I said this earlier. The ICC to Israelis don't believe they have any jurisdiction over them. And Hamas is not going to overturn its leaders. It might even juke them out and just say, well, we'll turn over our leaders when Benjamin Netanyahu's turned over to the ICC. They may say something along those lines, but neither of these parties are going to allow the ICC to go in and arrest them, and no party is going to arrest these parties on their behalf. Maybe if Hamas got isolated enough. It would have to be a crazy amount of isolation, and they had to go on their run. Maybe, I don't know, but that's not happening for Israel. I mean, Netanyahu would have to be on the run for something like that to happen, for either of these arrests to be practical.
The judges of the International Criminal Court must be now given the space to do their work and to dispassionately and objectively review the evidence that we have submitted. Should the learned judges approve my applications and issue the requested warrants, I will work closely with the registrar of the court to apprehend the named individuals. I call upon and count on all states, especially state parties to the Rome Statute, to approach this application and the subsequent judicial decision that will be rendered with the same seriousness they have shown in other situations. I also stand ready to work with non-state parties in our common pursuit of justice and accountability. It is critical in this moment that my office and all parts of the court continue to conduct our work with full independence and impartiality. And I insist that all attempts to impede, to intimidate, or to improperly influence the officials of this court cease immediately.
Stop.
My office will not hesitate to act.
Swiper, no swiping.
To the provisions of Article 70 of the Rome Statute, if such conduct continues and persists. We will also submit further applications for warrants of arrest if and when we determine, after independent and objective analysis, that the threshold of realistic prospect of conviction has been met. My office is advancing multiple and interconnected additional lines of inquiry, including concerning reports of sexual violence during the 7th of October attacks in Israel, and in relation to the large-scale bombing that has caused and continues to cause so many civilian deaths and injuries and so much suffering in Gaza. I renew my call for all parties to the current conflict to comply with these basic principles of law without any further delay.
Yeah, good luck.
I also wish to emphasize that the principle of complementarity at the heart of the Rome Statute will continue to be assessed by my office as we take action in relation to the alleged crimes and alleged perpetrators, and as we move forward with other lines of inquiry. But complementarity requires us to defer to national authorities only when they sincerely engage in independent and impartial judicial processes that do not shield suspects from accountability and which are not a sham. It requires thorough investigations at all levels, addressing the policies and actions underlying these applications. Today, I wish to underline one message very clearly. It's my strong conviction that if we do not demonstrate our willingness to apply the law equally, if it is seen as being applied selectively, we will be creating the conditions for its complete collapse.
True.
And in doing so, we would be loosening the remaining bonds that hold us together.
True.
The stabilizing connections between all communities, all individuals, the safety net to which all victims look to in times of suffering. This is the true risk we face at this perilous moment. Now more than ever, we must collectively demonstrate that international humanitarian law, the foundational baseline for human conduct during conflict, applies to all individuals and applies equally across situations addressed by my office and by the court. This is how we will prove, tangibly, in real terms, for all victims, that the lives of all human beings, wherever they may be, have equal value.
It's a very lofty goal. And I mean, I do generally agree with the idea of you have to have consistency in policy in order to make the standards stronger. The more you break the policy, even if you think that you have the power to, the least strength that norm has. And the less strength the norm has, the less pressure the norm puts on people in order to hold it up, therefore creating a death spiral for the norm and IR. I mean, I agree with this generally in principle, and it does feel like they shot generally down the scope here. But again, first it has to get through the judge, and then it's just going to be the same situation that we had with Vladimir Putin. It's going to be whether or not they end up putting the arrest warrant out. It's not going to end with Netanyahu or the leader of Hamas going before the International Criminal Court. I'd say the leader of Hamas is at least more likely because they don't have like necessarily state backing, even though they have like Iranian backing. They're not literally part of a state apparatus. They're part of the apparatus of one of the, a large militant non-governmental organization. But the odds of either of these people getting arrested is tremendously low. And so if anything, the main benefit this is going to have outside of continuing to help set the standards and norms around the rules of armed conflict, the other big thing, which is I think as equally important, is setting the historical record. Having a judge go through case by case by case makes it so instead of having to go and visit all the details of a war 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, you can turn to these court decisions where they can have all of the information gathered for you. You can have what is supposed to be a neutral arbitrating organization going through said information, naming what's credible, naming what's not, having access to information that the random sent public researcher isn't going to have available to them, both because they don't have the resources and or the contacts. And that transparency of what the historical record should be helps people in the future when reviewing the armed conflict. And while that doesn't necessarily bring justice, it does help bring about, I think, a better understanding of what led to the war crimes that took place and what exactly did take place. So either way, even if it doesn't lead to anybody being arrested, I do think this is useful, even if it isn't useful in the way that we want it to be useful necessarily, or unlikely to be useful in the way we want it to be useful. Okay, that is enough of that.